I lived in New York for 40 years, and I need to tell you something before you decide you want a life like the one I had. New York didn't take my money. It took something far more expensive. But you won't notice what it takes until it's already gone. When people hear that I lived in New York for 4 decades, they usually assume I must have loved it. They imagine bright lights, opportunity, momentum. They imagine success. And they're not wrong. I did succeed. I just didn't understand the price I was paying while it was happening. When I first arrived in New York, I was 23 years old, young, ambitious, hungry. I came with a suitcase, a few connections, and the belief that if I worked hard enough, everything else would fall into place. New York encourages that belief. It rewards it. It applauds it. The city doesn't ask who you are. It asks what you can do. And at that age, I liked that. I liked the pressure. I liked the feeling that if I stopped moving, I'd be left behind. It made every day feel important, urgent, alive. People back home would say things like, "You're brave for living there." What they really meant was, "That sounds exhausting." They were right, but exhaustion felt like progress. In New York, being tired is a badge of honor. If you're not busy, you're invisible. If you're not hustling, you're falling behind. So I stayed busy. I stayed visible. I stayed exhausted. At first, everything felt temporary. The tiny apartment, the long hours, the noise. I told myself it was just the beginning, that once I made it, I'd slow down. That's the first lie New York teaches you. There is no moment where you feel like you've made it. There's always a higher rent, a bigger deal, a faster pace, another opportunity that makes resting feel irresponsible. I watched years disappear inside that logic. Years I didn't even feel passing. Because in New York, time doesn't move forward. It rushes. And if you don't hold on to something solid, it carries you with it. I met my wife in the city. She was smart, grounded, calm in a way New York rarely allows. She saw the city as a place to live. I saw it as something to conquer. At first, our differences worked. She reminded me to slow down. I reminded her to dream bigger. That balance didn't last, because New York always wins the argument. Slow feels like weakness there. Stillness feels dangerous. So I leaned into the city, and slowly, without meaning to, I leaned away from her. We didn't fight much. That's important to understand. There was no dramatic breaking point, no single argument, no betrayal, just distance. Distance created by long days, by dinners postponed, by conversations cut short because there was always something else demanding attention. New York doesn't respect boundaries. It respects output. And I gave it everything I had. I told myself I was doing it for us, for our future, for security. That's another lie that feels responsible while it's stealing from you. I worked late because that's what people did. I missed moments because everyone missed moments. I told myself this was normal, that this was the cost of living somewhere important. I didn't notice how often my wife ate dinner alone. I didn't notice how quiet our apartment became. Not silent, quiet. There's a difference. Silence is obvious. Quiet is subtle. Quiet sneaks in. I remember standing in a crowded subway car one evening, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, and realizing I felt completely alone. That's another thing New York doesn't prepare you for. You can be surrounded by millions of people and still feel isolated. In fact, the city almost encourages it. Everyone is focused on getting somewhere else. No one stays still long enough to see you. Years passed like that. Promotions, moves, bigger apartments that still felt too small, higher income that somehow never felt like enough. In New York, more is never enough, because enough would mean stopping, and stopping feels like failure. I became good at my job, very good. People trusted me, relied on me, admired me. At work, I felt competent, respected. At home, I felt distant, uncertain. And instead of addressing that uncertainty, I avoided it. Work was easier. Work had rules. Work rewarded effort. Relationships don't work that way. They require presence. And presence is hard when your mind is always somewhere else. I told myself my wife understood, that she knew this phase would pass. But phases don't pass on their own. They turn into patterns, and patterns turn into lives. One night, after nearly 20 years in the city, my wife asked me a question that still stays with me. She said, "Do you ever feel like we're living someone else's life?" I laughed it off. Not because it was funny, because it made me uncomfortable. New York trains you to outrun discomfort, to drown it out with noise, with movement, with achievement. So I did what I always did. I went back to work. Looking back, that was the moment I should have stopped. Not dramatically, not by quitting everything, just by listening. But listening would have required me to admit that the life I was building might not be the life I wanted. And that thought was terrifying. Because in New York, identity and success become intertwined. If you stop chasing, who are you? If you step back, what do you have left? I didn't want to find out. So I kept going. 40 years is a long time to live anywhere. Long enough for a city to shape you. Long enough for its values to become yours. I started measuring my worth by productivity, by how busy I was, by how full my calendar looked. If a day felt calm, I felt anxious. If a weekend felt open, I filled it. Stillness made me restless. That's when I realized something had gone wrong. But realizing something is wrong doesn't automatically change it. Change requires courage. And courage is harder when you're comfortable, even if that comfort is built on exhaustion. Eventually, my wife and I left New York, not because we planned it, because staying no longer made sense. The city hadn't changed. We had. Or rather, we hadn't changed enough. Leaving New York felt like failure at first. I didn't say that out loud, but I felt it. Like I was stepping off a moving train and watching it speed away without me. I expected relief, peace, clarity. What I didn't expect was grief. Grief for the version of myself I had been chasing. Grief for the years I couldn't get back. Grief for the moments I realized I had traded away without knowing their value. Away from the noise, things became clearer. Too clear. I saw how much of my life had been shaped by urgency instead of intention. How often I had chosen work over connection. How many conversations I rushed through. How many moments I postponed. New York didn't steal those things from me. I gave them willingly. That's the hardest part to accept. The city didn't force me to stay late. It rewarded me when I did. It didn't tell me to neglect my marriage. It simply made everything else feel more important. That's how expensive places really cost you. Not in dollars, in attention, in presence, in relationships that slowly weaken under the weight of distraction. If you're living in New York or dreaming of it, I'm not telling you to leave. I'm telling you to pay attention, because the city will take as much of you as you're willing to give, and it won't tell you when to stop. Only you can do that. I learned too late that success without boundaries is just another form of loss. That ambition without reflection is dangerous. That chasing more doesn't automatically lead to meaning. New York taught me how to work. It didn't teach me how to live. I had to learn that elsewhere, in quieter places, in slower moments, in conversations that took time. If I could speak to my younger self, standing on a New York sidewalk with his whole life ahead of him, I wouldn't tell him not to go. I would tell him this: build your life first, then let your career fit into it, not the other way around. Because cities like New York don't slow down. They don't pause. They don't look back. And if you're not careful, one day you will. And you'll realize the cost wasn't the rent. It was the years, the dinners, the conversations, the quiet moments that never happened. If this story made you pause, share it with someone you care about. Leave a comment and tell me where you're spending your time and whether it's costing you more than you expected. And subscribe to The Last Lesson. Some places make you successful. Others teach you what success actually costs. And those lessons always come later.